The room was cold, not just because the walls were made of black steel, or because the ceiling leaked drops of yellow gas from the vents, but because the silence in that chamber was so deep, so sharp, so heavy, that even the sound of a heartbeat seemed too loud to belong there. And in the very center of that cruel chamber, under a ring of blinking blue lights and wires that pulsed like veins, a human soldier named Rourke was chained to the alien weapon that was not designed to kill, but to break the soul without touching the body. The aliens who built the device stole. Pale creatures with bone-colored skin and fingers like black wires stood behind a wall of glass, watching him, waiting for him to scream, because no species had ever lasted more than 7 minutes inside the device, and none had ever left with their minds still whole. But the human didn't scream, he didn't beg, didn't even speak. He just looked at the glass, and he smiled. The machine was called the Mind Spine. It didn't burn skin, it didn't snap bones. What it did was worse. It reached into a being's deepest thoughts, found their most painful memories, their fears, their regrets, their losses, and then it replayed them again and again, twisting them, multiplying them, making them feel like they were drowning in their own mind. With no air, no mercy, and no escape, the Arxel Empire had used the Mind Spine to shatter diplomats, to extract secrets, to break warriors who had trained for decades in pain resistance, and they believed it would be no different for the human, because they had studied his kind, seen the chaos in their wars, the weakness in their emotions, the pain in their loss. But what they didn't understand was this: humans don't run from pain, they learn from it, they live inside it, and sometimes they smile at it. Inside the machine, Rourke saw fire. He saw Earth burning. He saw his family's home turn to dust. He saw his squad screaming. He saw the blood, the smoke, the silence that followed. But he did not break. He did not cry. He stared into those memories, watched them twist into nightmares, and felt the machine trying to tear open his mind. But instead of falling apart, instead of drowning in the past, Rourke did something no other prisoner had ever done inside the Mind Spine. He laughed. It was not loud. It was not forced. It was not mad. It was steady. It's like someone remembering something they'd already survived and realizing that fear had no power over them anymore. Behind the glass, Commander Saul of the Arxel Elite leaned forward, tapping the screen with one bony finger, narrowing his violet eyes. "How long has he been inside?" he asked. 8 minutes, the technician answered nervously. "He should have collapsed by now." "Play his neural readout," Saul ordered. The screen lit up.
There
were spikes high, sharp signals of pain. But below them, there was something impossible. Control? The human's brain was processing the pain, but not reacting like the others. He was using the memories, not running from them. He was reshaping them, filing them, studying them. Impossible. The technician whispered, "He's turning the simulation back on itself." Saul didn't reply, because at that very moment inside the machine, Rourke whispered something to himself. A name. A promise. Something the machine tried to twist but couldn't, because it wasn't a regret, it was a reason. The lights inside the chamber flickered. The glass began to hum. The walls shook not from power overload, but from something deeper. Something the machine had never felt before. Resistance. And then the unimaginable happened. The machine tried to eject the human. It tried to get rid of him. The Mind Spine had never rejected a target before. But now it was breaking apart, piece by piece, as if something inside the human had corrupted it, infected it with something it had no defense against. Not rage, not strength, not revenge, but resilience. Alarms sounded. The walls turned red. The tech shouted. And Commander Saul stared at the screen in disbelief as Rourke stood up, chains broken. The machine hissing behind him, eyes glowing faintly with energy he wasn't supposed to have, and smiled again. But this smile wasn't calm. It wasn't soft. It was a warning, because the aliens had used their most powerful weapon. It's designed to break his mind, to strip his soul. And all they had done was show him how to fight them better. They thought the machine had failed because of a glitch, because maybe the cables were old or the neural dampeners were misaligned. or the simulation was corrupted by Earth-based brain patterns they hadn't accounted for. But when the Arxel engineers took the device apart, piece by piece, system by system, they found something far worse than failure. Hiding in the circuits, they found a trace of him still inside it. Not a signal, not a virus, but a pattern, like someone had walked through the center of the machine and left footsteps behind. And each one of those steps was rewriting how the machine behaved, how it thought, and even what it feared. The mind spine hadn't glitched. It had been overpowered, not by force, not by code, but by something no one had ever expected a human to use so effectively inside a weapon of suffering. Focus, Commander. Saul stood in silence as the engineers played back the final 30 seconds of the recording over and over, trying to understand how a creature with soft skin, single heart, no telepathic cortex, and 1,000 emotional scars could survive an onslaught that had crushed Kaltarian generals, melted Drexian warlords, and turned 6 Krovax assassins into whispering shells. But every time they slowed the footage, zoomed into his face, paused on his eyes, they saw something more terrifying than pain resistance, more dangerous than physical strength. They saw that Rourke was studying them, not reacting, not breaking, but watching, memorizing how the machine reacted to him, how the aliens watching behind the glass flinched when he didn't scream, how the security lights dimmed when he smiled, how the power flickered when he leaned forward, and how the fear inside the room shifted from him fearing them to them fearing him. And while the Arxel Empire gathered its top minds to investigate the anomaly, Rourke sat quietly in his holding cell, arms crossed, his body still marked by the electric clamps that had tried to lock him in place, but his eyes, those calm, sharp, human eyes, were already building a new path through the next set of walls, because what the aliens didn't understand was this. Rourke had spent years in wars that no simulation could replicate. He had lost people whose faces never left his memory. He had bled in places that never stopped hurting. But none of those things broke him. They taught him. And now the same pain they tried to use as a weapon had become his guide. The guards changed shifts more often now, but they didn't say it out loud. They didn't mention the cameras in Cell 6 that kept shorting out. They didn't speak of the dreams that came after one night on duty outside Rourke's door. They didn't talk about how the lights dimmed when he opened his eyes in the dark. But whispers spread. The human wasn't normal. He wasn't weak. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in that cell, because something had followed him out of the mind spine. Something the machine couldn't erase. Something alien that now lived inside him. Meanwhile, back in the Arxel control wing, a high-ranking xenopsychologist named Dr. Veal pulled Rourke's neural scan for the 7th time, comparing it to the readings taken before the trial, hoping to find a chemical imbalance, a neural disruption, anything that would explain what had happened inside the machine. But instead, she found something terrifying. His brainwave patterns had changed. The human mind usually behaved like a storm, erratic, emotional, unpredictable, but Rourke's mind now showed perfect structure. No spikes, no breakdowns, no fear pulses, only a quiet, constant loop. Like he was playing a song in his head over and over, a rhythm, a code, plan. When she played the loop through the simulation software, it crashed the system 3 times. Even the computers couldn't understand the human's new mental pattern, because it wasn't just resistance. It wasn't just calm. It was control. And the moment she realized that, Dr. Veal turned off the monitor, took a deep breath, and said what no Arxel scientist had ever said before about a prisoner. He isn't trapped in here with us. We're trapped in here with him. And deep below the cell block, Rourke waited, not to escape, not to fight. Not yet, because he had already learned the layout. He'd already memorized the guard rotations. He had already seen the faces of the ones who ordered his pain. And now he was waiting for the next weapon they would throw at him, because the last one hadn't broken him. It had opened a door, and next time, he wouldn't walk through it alone. The Arxel High Command didn't broadcast their decision, didn't send a public message, didn't mark it on any official record, because this wasn't a punishment, and it wasn't a warning. It was an erasure, a quiet deletion of a problem that had become too dangerous to explain, too strange to study. and too terrifying to let exist for one more day. They activated Protocol Null, the last option for cases where enemies became too powerful to break and too clever to contain. And for the first time in 100 years, they summoned the Keltorian Executioner, a creature not made of flesh or machine, but something born in deep Arxel labs, shaped through thousands of failed experiments, and finally perfected into a being that had never lost a single target. No trial, no words. No witness, just one mission: eliminate the human. The Executioner didn't walk, it flowed. Its body shimmered like liquid metal, its eyes glowing dim blue, and its voice, when it did speak, was not spoken through sound, but delivered straight into the brain like a whisper made of glass and fire. They dropped it silently into the lower prison chambers. No alarms, no doors opened. It simply passed through the walls, through the lights, through the cameras, and the guards didn't stop it because none of them had clearance to even see it. All they knew was that Cell 6 was now empty. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Rourke had already left the cell 3 hours ago. Not physically. Not by digging or crawling or hacking systems. He had left through the minds of the guards. One by one, planting small doubts with every glance, every quiet moment. Every second, he sat completely still while they watched him until the fear inside them grew so loud, they started to imagine his footsteps when he hadn't moved, hear him breathing when he was silent, finally begin to believe something that Rourke had never once said aloud: he can't be contained. And that belief spread like a virus. It's a dangerous one, because in the Arxel system, belief shapes reality. So when the Executioner arrived in Cell 6, it found a chamber full of security fields, blinking lights, and reinforced plating. But no prisoner, no chains, no sounds, just the echo of something that should not be gone. And on the wall where the human used to sit was a mark not carved, it's not burned. Written in Arxel language, 5 words: "You came too late again." High Command panicked. They sent override codes. They tried to seal every gate. They ordered a blackout across 3 floors, but nothing stopped it. The system was already cracking, because the one thing the Mind Spine had done without the designers, realizing it, was give Rourke a full map of their internal data stream. Every memory it tried to torture him with was stored inside the same neural net that powered their defenses, so, instead of erasing his mind, it had shown him how to bend the system from the inside. He didn't just escape, he rewrote the prison around him. One by one, power cells overloaded. Hallways turned black, doors opened at random. Defense drones began to misidentify targets, and in the middle of it all, Rourke walked, calm, quiet, unnoticed, because the building no longer saw him as a threat. It saw him as a part of itself. By the time the Executioner caught up to him deep inside the data core, where the memory banks of every prisoner were stored, it didn't scream, didn't warn, didn't threaten. It attacked, fast, silent, precise. But Rourke didn't fight it with weapons. He didn't run. He just looked at it, tilted his head, and smiled. Because what the Arxel didn't understand was this: he wasn't alone anymore. Every scream from the Mind Spine, every face of the prisoners tortured before him, every broken mind, he had seen them, he had heard them, and now they were part of him, not ghosts, it's not memories. Fuel. The Executioner's blade pierced his chest, clean, deadly, final. But Rourke didn't fall. He leaned forward, whispered one sentence into the creature's mind: "You were built to kill fear, but I am what comes after fear." And then the Executioner fell apart, not exploded, not destroyed, just stopped being, like it had looked into something so deep, so impossible. It chose not to exist anymore. Security logs later marked the event as internal disintegration. But those who reviewed the footage didn't finish watching, because in the last 2 seconds of the recording, Rourke looked directly at the camera and he smiled. The fire wasn't natural, wasn't made of heat or flame or anything that burned the skin the way humans understood it. No, this fire was alive. It moved like a predator. It hunted anything with thought, anything that remembered, anything that feared. And when it touched your mind, it didn't leave behind ashes, left behind silence. Forever, the Arxel called it the flare womb, a security measure, an ancient defense sealed deep beneath the lower chambers of the prison world known as Exile 9, where the worst of the Empire's secrets were hidden, because if someone ever came too close to those secrets, too close to the truth, the fire would be released, not to punish, not to teach a lesson, but to make sure nothing ever walked out again. And now it was burning, because the human had entered, and no one could stop him. Rourke didn't run, didn't slow down. He didn't look for protection or try to shield his face or skin. He walked step by step through a corridor filled with living flame that danced like a storm of thought and heat and memory. One of the guards watching through the long-range vision lens whispered, "He'll be gone in seconds." That's Arxel fire. That thing can melt a Krovax war tank in 12 seconds. But the seconds passed. Then more, and the fire didn't touch him. It came close. It circled him. It pulsed with hungry light, but it did not burn, did not destroy it. Paused as if it saw something inside him, something older than flame, something stronger than destruction. From her command station, Dr. Veal stared at the screens. She had studied the fire years ago. She had watched it consume creatures that didn't even have nervous systems. It was pure will, pure erasure. But now the fire was reacting like it was afraid. How is he still alive? One of the officers asked, voice shaking. Dr. Veal didn't answer. She didn't have an answer, because the truth was growing louder with every step Rourke took. He wasn't surviving the fire. The fire was choosing to let him pass. And as Rourke walked deeper into the flare womb, the walls began to shift. Not physically, mentally. They opened. Revealed doors no one had seen before. Memories, archives, whispers from the past, and still. Rourke did not stop, because he wasn't just walking to survive, he was walking toward something the Empire thought was forgotten, something they had buried under fire, under fear, under death, the Hall of Names, a room older than the war. Older than the Arxil expansion. It's a room full of metal plates and alien languages and human voices trapped in code. It's left behind by prisoners who never made it out, and as Rourke stood in the middle of it, it's the fire around him pulsing like a heartbeat. The walls lit up, one by one, each plate glowing, each memory waking, and Rourke spoke. Only 2 words, "I remember," and the fire bowed. His stash bowed. It bent backward, opening a clear path behind him, like the flame itself had accepted the truth. It could not erase that this human was no longer just a survivor. It's no longer just a prisoner. He was a witness, and a reckoning. Somewhere above, in the sealed tower of the Arxil High Chamber, Commander Saul turned from the screen. "It's not the human we should fear anymore," he said quietly. "It's what we made him carry." Far below, in the room of lost names, Rourke reached out and touched one glowing panel. A name flickered. Rourke. Tessa. Sister. Executed. No record. He closed his eyes. He didn't cry, but something in the fire grew colder, and then the whole prison began to shake. Long ago, before the prison was built, before the Arxil Empire called the planet XL9, before they erased thousands of voices and buried them under silence and smoke, there had been something else beneath the surface, something older than the Empire, older than the war, something they were afraid of. Something they covered up with stone and fire and death, and now, as the ground cracked open, as flames bent away from him, as alarms screamed across all levels of the base, the human stood. Above that ancient place, with his fists bleeding and his breath slow, still he kept digging, because the truth had a name. He had seen it. Written on the glowing wall of the Hall of Names. His sister, Tessa Rourke, marked as executed. But no record, and that meant only one thing. She didn't die. They buried her. And now, so many years later, he was going to find her, no matter what. It cost. He dug through solid rock with nothing but his bare hands. No tools, no maps. Just a fire inside him that the alien weapon couldn't extinguish. Every broken nail, every bruise, every drop of blood that touched the stone only made the fire burn stronger, because with every inch he clawed downward, He wasn't just breaking through the floor of a prison. He was breaking through the lies they had built on top of her name. And the Arcsil knew it. Above, in the war room, Dr. Veal watched the sensors flash red. No explosives. No digging bots. No seismic tech. Just a single human punching through materials that were designed to withstand orbital bombardments. Is that even possible? One officer whispered. Veal said nothing, because deep down, she had stopped asking what was possible the moment Rourke smiled inside the mind spine. Security tried to intervene. Drones flew in with stun rounds. Automated turrets dropped from the ceiling, but nothing stopped him. He moved like a shadow under lightning, fast, unseen, untouchable, because the fire still protected him. It did not burn him. It moved with him. And with each step he took, the prison grew colder for everyone else. After hours of silence, he found it a hatch, circular, old, rust around the edges. Marked not in Arcsil script, but in Earth Standard English. A warning scratched in by someone human. We're still here. He opened it, not slowly, not carefully, like he already knew. And as the hatch hissed open, what rose up was not air or dust or heat. It was light, not artificial, not controlled, but warm, alive. Below the prison was not a cell. It was a sanctuary, built by humans, by prisoners, by survivors, by the ones the Arcsil claimed had been executed but who had vanished instead. Hundreds of names, hundreds of faces, and among them, standing in the center, older, hardened, scarred but unmistakably alive, was a woman with short dark hair and a fire in her eyes that matched his Tessa. She didn't say his name. She didn't cry. She just walked to him, placed her hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "Took you long enough." The room filled with quiet, but not fear, not shock. Hope, because the fire hadn't protected Rourke. Not really, it had followed him, because the people down there had taught it to. They had controlled it, bent it, learned from it. They had been building something, waiting for someone to bring the truth back to the surface. And now that someone had come, now that someone had dug through stone, metal, and memory, they were ready to rise. Above ground, the Arcsil Empire sent reinforcements. An entire war fleet, but they were too late, because Rourke wasn't digging anymore, he was marching. And this time, he wasn't marching alone. The Arcsil Empire didn't wait. They didn't try to talk. They didn't try to understand. They didn't even pause to ask how a single human had survived their weapon. Walked through their fire and found the forgotten. They just sent ships, an entire battle group. 5 carriers, 12 gunships, orbital drones, stealth bombers, and elite ground troops armed with plasma scythes and bio-trackers meant to target any heartbeat that didn't match their kind. They wanted to erase the problem, fast cleaned without a trace. Because if the other worlds ever found out what had been hidden under Exile 9, if they discovered that the executed prisoners were still alive, if they learned that hope had survived where only death was promised, then the Empire's lies would crack. Once lies begin to crack, truth becomes a weapon, so they decided to crush the truth with force. But when the dropships landed, the human was waiting. He wasn't alone. Rourke stood at the top of the ramp next to his sister, Tessa. And behind them were the forgotten men and women, old and young, humans, who had once been prisoners but had become something else in the dark. They wore no armor, held no high-tech weapons. Some carried tools, some had scars. Most had only their hands, but their eyes burned. With memory, with anger, with purpose, because for years the Empire thought they were dead. For years they had been erased from history. But now the ones buried under fire had been pulled into the light again, and they remembered everything. The Arcsil commander, speaking through amplified speakers, gave them one warning. Surrender now. Return to your cells. We will spare the unarmed. Tessa stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice, but everyone heard her. We were unarmed when you buried us. And then the sky fell. Gunships roared overhead. Troops deployed in waves.
Ow.
Air turned red with fire, but something strange happened. The prisoners didn't scatter. They didn't hide. They didn't scream, because the fire the same living fire that once burned beneath the prison, rose again. It didn't consume the humans. It fought for them. The Arxel fire weapon was never supposed to choose sides. It was designed to erase all. But over the years, the survivors underground had learned to speak to it, not with words, not with commands, but with memories, with pain, with human will. They had turned it into something else, a guardian. Now it burned. The attackers, curled around the humans like armor, melted steel before it touched flesh, turned explosives to smoke, blinded drones before they could lock onto a target. The Arxil panicked. The Empire's perfect machines had no answer for ancient pain made. Real and Rourke, he didn't fight like a soldier anymore. He moved like a storm, fast, silent, focused. He wasn't just trying to survive. No, he was trying to send a message that no matter how deep you bury the truth, no matter how strong your weapons, no matter how loud your empire screams, if you give a human a reason to stand, you'll never make him fall again. By nightfall, the battlefield was silent. Not because all the enemies were dead, but because they ran. They left behind scorched armor, shattered drones, and broken command. Linkstot, because even machines know when they've lost, up in the orbiting flagship. Commander Saul watched the feed go black. He didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't call for more reinforcements. He simply turned to the council and said, he was never meant to survive the weapon. Now the weapon fights beside him. Down below, Tessa walked beside her brother. The sky was quiet. Stars were clear. And in the stillness, Rourke said, this is just one world. Tessa nodded. There are others still buried. He looked up at the stars and smiled again. Not because the war was over, but because he finally knew where to start. At first, the other worlds didn't believe the reports. How could they? The Arxil Empire was powerful, feared, ruthless beyond reason. They had conquered entire star systems. They had erased histories, silenced rebellions, buried civilizations, without leaving a trace. And yet now, whispers were spreading. Whispers of a man, just one, a prisoner who had walked through the Empire's greatest weapon, stared into its most secret fire, and come back, not broken, but smiling, they said. He'd torn through steel with his bare hands, that he'd called fire like it was part of his blood, that he'd awakened the forgotten and led them into battle against machines designed to never lose. And somehow, he had won. Rourke didn't try to explain what happened on XL9. He didn't. Broadcast speeches. He didn't beg anyone to listen. Simply moved forward with Tessa by his side and a growing wave of survivors behind them. One by one, he started visiting other lost prisons, the black sites, the silent stations. Forgotten planets where the Arxel had hidden the people too dangerous to kill and too human to let free. They didn't come with fleets. They didn't bring fire. They brought truth. And everywhere they went, the same thing happened. The silence cracked. The walls opened. And buried people rose. In the Arxel council chambers, panic turned to fear. Fear turned to anger. He declared, him a terrorist, a ghost, a lie, a mistake in the record. But each time they spoke his name, more systems began to remember. Not just Earth-born humans, but others too, Koltarians, Krovaks, even former Arxel soldiers, those who had seen the truth. Those who had survived their own versions of the Mind Spine and wondered if they were the only ones. They weren't alone. Anymore because Rourke's story had escaped the prison, just like he did, and now it was lighting fires across the stars. He never asked to lead, but they followed him, not because he was the strongest, not because he was invincible, but because they had seen him in the deepest place of fear and pain, and he smiled back at it. The fire. The same strange energy that once guarded Exile 9 had spread too. Now it answered to others, those who had endured the worst and still stood. It burned in their eyes, in their hands, in their voices when they spoke the names of those they had lost. The galaxy had changed, not with war, not with armies, but with resistance that refused to die. Years later, a statue would stand where the Mind Spine once operated, not a symbol of war, not of destruction, but a simple figure, a man standing tall, chains at his feet, a quiet smile on his face, and at the base of that statue, the words carved in 100 languages. They tried to break one human. Instead, he reminded us we were never broken. Tessa stood beside her brother on the edge of a new world. She watched him stare at the stars and asked softly, "Do you think they'll ever stop coming?" He didn't answer at first. He just watched the sky where so many once came to conquer. Then he said they might. But even if they don't, I'm not the only one smiling anymore. And far across the galaxy, on worlds still healing, in places where pain still whispered, one truth remained stronger than ever. You can silence a voice, you can erase a name, you can bury a body, but you can't kill the instinct that made him stand. The human instinct to never surrender, to rise, and to help others rise too.